The government publishes details of its latest spending review on the 26th of June. This review will specify the allocation of current and capital spending across government departments in 2015-16. In this analysis, we consider what these allocations might look like, how much additional work there is still to do post-2015-16, and what the cuts to departmental spending and to government expenditure more generally mean for the shape of the state in the coming years. We make no attempt to consider the efficacy of the government's current deficit reduction plans. We simply analyse what the existing trajectory looks like. On current plans, and according to the latest OBR projections, we're around halfway through an unprecedented 8-year period of fiscal tightening. This means that, despite having already undergone significant cutbacks, government departments face further budget squeezes in the coming years. Government spending can be split into two components: departmental expenditure limits, or DEL, and annually managed expenditure, or AMI. DEL represents planned departmental spend and is the part of overall spending that is set out at each spending review, usually for a 3-year period. By contrast, AMI is more volatile demand-led expenditure, such as welfare payments. Although the government has some control over the size of AMI, by changing the level of and eligibility for different benefits, for example, large elements are driven by underlying economic and demographic conditions. Focusing here on DEL, we see that, following the allocation set out at Spending Review 2010, we can expect government departments to shrink by some 9% by 2014-15 compared with 2010-11. With protection in place for spending on schools, health and aid, these overall cuts translate into reductions of 1/4 in the Home Office, 2/5 in communities, and 1/2 in the Foreign and Commonwealth Office. Spending Review 2013 allocates further cuts across the non-protected departments for 2015-16. With many of the negotiations still to be finalised, the review may yet include an announcement about further cuts to social security. In the absence of such action, however, we can expect budget cuts of between 8% and 10% across most departments. Yet even this will leave much still to do. If any future government chooses to stick to the current deficit reduction plans, then a further £26 billion of savings will need to be found in 2016-17 and 2017-18. Achieving all of this via departmental cuts looks implausible, particularly if health, schools and aid spending remain protected. In this scenario, the pace of cuts would be significantly faster than those experienced since 2010-11. Overall spending on departments would be around 18% lower by 2017-18. with even major departments like Defence and the Home Office facing cuts of between 1/3 and 1/2. At the extreme, the FCO would face a 2/3 cut. Avoiding this outcome would require further action on AMI and/or tax receipts. The green line in this chart represents a continuum of DEL reductions versus such actions, and shows that the required DEL cuts would be reduced by 1 percentage point for every extra £3.5 billion saved or raised from elsewhere. As the dotted red line shows, maintaining the current pace of reductions in overall DEL would therefore require around £10 billion to be raised over 2016-17 and 2017-18 from some combination of cuts to social security and tax increases. Alternatively, the dotted blue line shows that maintaining the pace of DEL cuts expected in 2015-16 would require £7.5 billion. It's worth repeating, though, that these actions are sufficient only to maintain the current rate of cuts, with each additional pound proving harder and harder to find. Still larger cuts in AMI or increases in tax might be required. Of course, a further option, not considered here, is to delay or alter the trajectory of deficit reduction. In the face of such difficult options, and with so much uncertainty around many of the OBR's projections, this debate is likely to resurface. Here, however, we limit ourselves to considering the implications of sticking to the existing plans. From this starting point, our analysis shows just how fundamentally the shape of the state may change in the coming years. This chart compares the distribution of expenditure across departments in 2010-11 with the one that would exist in 2017-18 in the absence of further AMI cuts or tax rises, and on the assumption that health, schools and aid retain their real terms protection beyond 2015-16. It shows that the share of spending going on health would increase from around 1/4 to 1/3 over the period. In contrast, spending on defence, which previously accounted for around 10 pence of every pound spent by government, would shrink significantly. Looking next at the distribution of AMI spend over the same period and under the same assumptions, this chart shows that the share allocated to benefits and to tax credits is set to fall from around 62% to around 56%. Along with a growing number of accounting adjustments in the other category, the biggest increase in AMI share is accounted for by debt interest payments. Looking within the overall trend for benefits and tax credits, this chart shows state pension and associated payments are expected to increase year on year throughout the forecast period. In contrast, spending on many working age benefits is falling. In part, this is due to expectations of economic recovery, most clearly in relation to job seekers' allowance, for example. And in part, it's due to real terms cuts in the generosity of payments or in eligibility rules, with tax credits being the area most hit. In an effort to take greater control of AMI spending, both the government and the opposition have recently proposed introducing some form of limit on this expenditure. Although there are no details as yet, the Chancellor has spoken of implementing a firm limit on a significant proportion of AMI, while still allowing the automatic stabilisers to operate. The opposition has similarly referred to capping structural aspects of welfare spending. As this chart sets out, such promises are, in practice, likely to produce a focus on a fairly limited suite of benefits. If we remove all non-benefit and tax credit elements of AMI, and then further assume that state pension payments will sit outside of any cap, we are left with less than 1/3 of AMI which might be subject to action. Given their size, tax credits, housing benefit and disability benefits would appear to be on the front line. However, as this collection of charts shows, it is in practice very difficult to draw a distinction between structural and cyclical welfare spending. While some benefits, such as JSA, have a relatively clear correlation with economic growth, other patterns are less obvious. Taking tax credits as an example, while payments related to children might be considered structural, those that offer in-work support for people in low-paid jobs might be better categorised as cyclical. Disaggregating these factors will prove difficult at best. While much attention is currently focused on the spending review and the tough calls facing the coalition government, in truth there will be many more difficult choices for whoever wins the next election. Sticking to the current path of deficit reduction and shunning further cuts to welfare or increases in tax will have profound implications for the role and shape of the state in the coming decade. It's likely that something is going to have to give.